thank you, Lynn Hodib, for that wonderful introduction, musical introduction to our event this evening, Writing the Unseen Between Translation and Transparency. Lynn, who has just played the violin for us, is a PhD candidate in the Theater and Performance Studies program at CUNY, a theater maker, musician, and drama therapist from Beirut, now based in New York. She has acted in sound design and managed multiple theater productions between Beirut and New York. She performed with AUB Theater Initiative in Beirut, Lebanon Theater Company, Big Apple Playback Theater, Clown Gym, and many others. She's currently working on a collaborative piece titled The Suicide, a multimedia performance inspired by Tracy Chauhan's comic strips by the same title. As a scholar, she explores transgenerational memory in Lebanon in spaces of theater, protests, and archives. And we are very happy that she has began this event for us this afternoon. So please join me in thanking her, welcoming her again to this space with us. So I might have started by introducing myself as well. That might have been a good idea. My name is Wendell Marsh. I am an assistant professor here at Rutgers-Newark in the Department of Africana Studies. And I have the good fortune, and you have the misfortune of having me MC this event for us. And basically what we want to do this afternoon is to listen to a bilingual reading of a novel written by one of our own, Roula Seghaier, Memory of Pavement, or Dhakrat al-Asif. And that's the kind of initial reason for us to come together here. But in so doing, we're also going to be talking about themes of translation, talking about transmission, tradition, thinking through, what does it mean to read a text, and what is the role of the text in thinking through the relationship of all of these. And so Roula, the author of the text that we're going to be talking about today, is a writer and interdisciplinary researcher. She co-founded and managed an open access indie journal about body and gender research in the Swana region, while globally organizing within the informal economy workers movement. So she'll be reading from her award-winning novel, Memory of the Pavement. And we also have, as a visitor to campus, Safa Khatib, who is a poet, translator, and teacher. And it's a real kind of honor and pleasure to bring her here, as she was one of my very first students ever. And I'm just so proud to kind of see her work grow, develop, and blossom. So thank you for coming, Safa. Safa has written in numerous journals, including Words Without Borders, The Baffler, The Kenyan Review, and The White River. She is the recipient of support from the U.S. Fulbright Program and the Statler Center for Poetry, among other institutions. She's currently a PhD student in the track for international writers in the Department of Comparative Literature at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, and is the author of A Dress of Locusts, a book of poetry forthcoming from Bloomsbury 2025. So please join me in welcoming Roula and Safa to the stage.
انتهى به الأمر تحت السور. كان تحت السور مقهى معروف التقت فيه مجموعة من أدباء تونس ومثقفيها زمن الاستعمار الفرنسي في ثلاثينات القرن العشرين. أما هو فقد انتهى به الأمر تحت سور غير سور كتاب زمن الاحتلال أو المبدعين. شتان ما بينه وبين هؤلاء، شتان بين من أهدى حياته للإبداع ومن تمخضته الحياة مأساة لم تحتاج إلى مخيلة. شتان ما بين مقهاه وسوره، فسوره سور جاهل غير مهذب، لا ينظر لسياسات ولا يرتجل شعرا ولا يرتاد ندوات أدبية ولا مجالس فنية. سوره اليوم هو سور العاجزين.
He ended up under the ramparts. Tahta Sur, under the ramparts, was a well-known cafe where a group of Tunisia's writers and intellectuals met regularly during the French occupation in the 1930s. But he ended up under a different rampart than the one that loomed above the authors and creative minds during the occupation. What a world of difference between him and them. What a difference between those who dedicated their lives to the pursuit of originality and one whose life had come to be a tragedy too real to need imagining. Their cafe and his rampart couldn't be more different. His rampart was one of ignorance, without decorum, without talks on politics and improvised poetry, without literary seminars and artistic gatherings. Today, his rampart was the rampart of the helpless.
يقولون أنه مجنون، إنه مجرم، إنه هارب من مصحة عقلية أو من العدالة. المهم أنه غريب، وفي قرابة 20 سنة في الحي ذاك سمع آلاف النظريات حتى كاد يؤمن بها من فرط التكرار. جيد أنه منذ زمن قرر أن يدون حقيقته، وإلا ربما ضاعت منه هي كذلك. استقر على الرصيف في هذه الرقعة من الأرض منذ 20 سنة، لا يبرحها ويقصدها كما يقصد البيت والمأوى. رأى في هذا الجدار شبه المهدم شبيهه فصار له توأما. هو جدار مشروخ ومتروك ومتهالك، ورغم ذلك صامد وعريق. رأى في الصرصور الفضولي المتجول خارج الجارور ليلة روحا صديقة، فصار سميل لياليه. يمر على الشريد ناس لا يلقون السلام، ولكن الصرصور يحدثه دائما. يأتي إليه يقرئه السلام ويشاركه فتاة خبزه المتيبس. يحمي الصرصور الشريد من نظرات نعال المارة المستفزة. حرام أن يفنى بضربة نعل، فتاريخ الصرصور أطول من تاريخ البشرية وحضارته أبقى. وحين تنتهي الحضارات هذه ينتهونه ويبقى هو.
They say he'd gone mad, that he was a criminal who either escaped from a mental institution or from the hands of the law. Whatever the case was, he was an eccentric and a stranger who'd been in that same neighborhood for nearly 20 years. He had heard countless theories about who he really was, and he almost believed them to be true out of sheer repetition. It's a good thing he had thought to record the truth about himself long ago. Otherwise, he would have lost his own reality among everything else he had lost. He had remained on that very spot on the pavement for 10 years without ever leaving it, considering it a home and a shelter just like any other. He saw a reflection of himself in this wall that was so near to ruin, and so it became his twin. It was a wall that was cracked, abandoned, and frail, yet it remained steadfast and rooted. He considered the curious cockroach that came out of the sewer at night a friendly soul and his nighttime companion. People mostly passed by the homeless man without offering any greeting, but the cockroach always spoke to him. It always came to him, greeted him, and shared his stale breadcrumbs. He protected his roach friend from the hostile glares of every passerby's shoes. It would be wrong for the roach to perish from the strike of a shoe, to since its history was longer than humanity, and its civilization had persisted. And whenever these civilizations perish, they may end, but it will remain.
يعمل الشريد ظلاً لهذه السور في وقت فراغه، وما أكثر وقت فراغه. قرابة 20 سنة يعيش بتؤدة. عاش بعضها في مسقط رأسه في جنوب البلاد هرباً من العاصمة، حتى اكتشف أن التجاهل موهبة لا يملكها كما لا يملك نعمة النسيان. الذكريات تلحقه ولا يريد أن يعتق نفسه من أغلالها. قريته ومسقط رأسه محملة وجعاً، لكن وجعه الحي يسكن الجزء الشمالي من البلاد في العاصمة، وفي العاصمة إذن كان منفاه الإرادي. أراد أن يعيش جرحاً في عين من عاش خنجراً في قلبه وشظية في ذاكرته.
The homeless man toiled in the wall's shadow in his spare time, and he had quite a bit of spare time. For nearly 20 years he had lived in a deliberate state of sluggishness. He spent a few of them in his hometown in the south of Tunisia after fleeing the capital, until he realized that turning away was a skill he did not have, just as he wasn't blessed with forgetfulness. Memories haunted him, and he had no desire to free himself from their shackles. His hometown was filled with heartache, but his living heartache resided in the north, in the capital. And so it was in the capital then that he chose to live in voluntary exile. He wanted to spend the rest of his days as a pin in the eyes of the one who resided, as a dagger in his heart, a shard in his memory.
يتخذ هكذا الوقت معنى مغايرا عندما لا تكون هناك مواعيد يلهث وراءها ولا ناس يقابلهم ولا عمل ينتظره. يشعر بأن حياته طالت، أن زمنه كزمن الفراشة التي تعيش كل الحياة بمراحلها من الولادة والطفولة والكهولة والشيخوخة في يوم قصير الأمد وطويل التجربة. يوم بطول حياة، وأيامه في التشرد عديدة لا يدري آخرها ولا يريد لها آخرة. هذه الحياة لا يدرك بالفعل إن كانت اختيارا أو مسلكا إجباريا من مسالك حياته.
As far as he could tell, time takes on a different meaning when one has no appointments or duties to hurry to, nobody to meet or to work or to take care of. He felt like his life dragged on, that his time resembled that of a butterfly going through its life cycle, from birth through childhood, adulthood, and old age, in a single day, short in duration but lengthy in experience. A day was as long as a lifetime, and his days spent in homelessness were so many that he didn't know if there'd be another life after them, and he didn't want one. As for this life, he wasn't sure if it was really up to him, or if it was simply the path he had to take.
هو لا يريد أمانا ولا رفاها، بل يريد أن يسقط، لأن السقوط وحده يشعره بحقيقته. لقد أوصد أبواب الرجوع إلى الأمان والراحة، وترك مفاتيحها في الداخل عنوة وقصدا. يظن الشريد أنه أول من لا يهرب من جلاده، بل يهرب إليه. لا يستطيع تحمل البعد عنه فيقطع المسافات مشيا، عله يحرك فيه ساكنا، عله يرى اضطرابا في عينيه فينتشي من الانتقام الرحيم.
He wanted neither safety nor well-being. He only wanted to collapse, since only collapsing put him in touch with his reality. He had locked the doors of return to safety and comfort, leaving their keys inside for good. The homeless man thought he was the first one not to run away from his torturer, but toward him. He couldn't bear being away from him. He would walk for miles and miles, hoping to stir up what was latent within him, hoping he might see panic in his eyes and feel the release of merciful revenge.
Thank you so much. Remarkable excerpt and translation of your novel. So basically, as we've already started reading, hearing the reading from Memory of Pavement, we're going to talk about this excerpt a bit, then we'll get another reading, then we'll have a kind of a break, an intermission with refreshments, then we'll do a close reading. I forgot to thank our sponsors for this evening. So the Arabic Language Initiative, led by Amir Musavi, here in the room, has made this event possible. Thank you, by the way. But I would like for us to hear from you, Roula, about this novel overall, kind of situating this passage and kind of who these characters are and what really drove the story itself, but then also what drove you to write it.
Thank you, Wendell, for organizing this event, and yes, and also I want to say that there's a couch. It's very comfortable, so for the brave souls out there, please come closer. Well, first of all, as you can tell, I was in a high-functioning depression, right? But I think that the anecdote that I can share with you about how I decided to make my main protagonist a character that writes, that narrates his history while living on the streets, is that when I was living in Beirut, I was living on Bliss Street, which is the street facing the American University of Beirut. And it was the street where a woman lived. Her name is Mariam. And there were a lot of urban legends or myths or folklore that were told about her, which is the same story that is told about any older homeless woman in the country, pretty much. That she has escaped with her boyfriend during the Civil War, her boyfriend being Palestinian, and that she was disowned because the country is sectarian, so escaping with somebody from a different sect, especially during the Civil War, would be frowned upon, and that she's still waiting for him and he is never to return. What was interesting about Mariam, since I was her neighbor, was, to me, there are a lot of things interesting about her, but that she actually had A4 papers, like this size. Is that an A4? Okay. So she had A4 papers that she would guard and she would write in, and I'd always try to sort of snoop at it, and we would engage in conversation sometimes. Well, frequently, because she was, I think, more comfortable communicating with me than with others, because sometimes she would get aggressive, as you can imagine, somebody who's lived many years on the street. When Lynn came over yesterday for the rehearsal, she remembers Mariam as well. Mariam used to disappear for a week or two every now and then, and one time she has disappeared for longer. And my MA advisor at the time, Tariq Tal, called me. His wife worked in the hospital, and he told me that Mariam was brought in a critical condition and that she has passed. And she has asked me to come pick up her papers because people, I guess, knew, whomever went to AUB sort of would notice that we have some level of a relationship. I thought about it for a day, called him and said I'm not going to pick it up because Mariam was very secretive about it and protective of it, and it wasn't something that she has willed to give me. And Tariq Tal said that he would just wait on me for 2 weeks if I have a change of heart, but then he's throwing that out. So he did throw it out, and a lot of my peers and my colleagues were saying they have contributed to her erasure, that I should have like taken that and like contributed whatever she has written to archives, also the history of the city and so on and so forth. It wasn't my feeling, it still is not the way I feel about it. And so for my main character, I wanted this to be a little bit of a closure for me, but perhaps for her, I have him write his memory, and in letters that nobody will ever read, but we get to read them because we're the readers of this book, to satisfy my curiosity and try and imagine a life that would have ended up with a character like that on the streets, but also to pay homage to Maryam.
Yes, that's incredible. So at the center of this story is both a kind of fact of opacity, right? This fact that there is a story, a narrative that exists, that is written, but that you willfully kind of chose not to pursue, given the relationship you had and what you understood of Maryam. Perhaps as we kind of continue the discussion, we can kind of think about the relationship between opacity and refusal. But before we go further, I also wanted to hear from Safa, to hear what were some of your impressions and also kind of any affinities you felt in the work itself as you engaged in this kind of process of translation.
Yeah, thank you. First, I want to thank both Roula and Wendell for having me. It's really cool to come and to translate this and then to come and be able to talk about it. And I think the first thing that was interesting to me about even the novel was that there are so many relationships already embedded in even the first paragraph. So in the first paragraph of the novel itself, we have Tunisia, the 1930s. We have a period much later than that. We haven't placed it yet, but in future chapters we get to know that we're sort of around the period of the 1990s. So already there's a historical relationship. And then the main character's relationship to himself began to interest me a lot. The way that he feels like he really has to kind of articulate himself into being. It's not just express himself, but actually give himself access to his own reality because he feels like he's been denied this. So that was interesting. And then also the relationships that have been involved with me with the novel itself as a text. So, studying with Wendell when I was in university, studying the Arabic language, which isn't my first language, it's a language that I learned over the course of many years, but has always felt like a relationship of sort of struggle and interpretation. And so, going from that to then being connected with Roula through Wendell and to encounter her novel. So really all of these relationships were really, I was thinking about them all simultaneously while encountering the novel. And I think that really influenced what I became interested in.
Yes, thanks for that. So, given we're here thinking about narrative, but also translation, language, of course, is central to how we think about that. And in any kind of language classroom, they'll often talk about the kind of 5 competencies, right? So 4 competencies. So the listening, speaking, reading, writing. But then the 5th competency kind of being culture. So kind of in between thinking language and the cultural nuances that you're trying to present in the text, I'm curious about what were some of the things you were trying to do at the level of language, at representation of culture in the story?
I didn't prepare in advance for the questions, so you are going to get a raw response. I think that there were a couple of things at play. So one person had suggested that I name the novel, instead of Memory of the Pavement, Diaries of Orphanhood or Diaries of Exile, because the two main characters at some point their lives intersect, and there's a fleeting moment where they meet and like are no longer in the same space or time or culture or context. So there's a brief comfort and then exile, both in the material sense but also spiritually. And I wanted each character to have a distinct voice that reflects their respective cultures and also that reflects their age. So for example, when we read the letters, they are letters but they're unsent, that the main character is writing. There is a teleology that Safa was speaking about, and the letters are dated so we can conceive of what was happening in the country at that time. For instance, the beginning of the novel is from a juxtaposition of what that space signified in a particular moment of like revolution and decolonialism against the French, and then the lives unfold during the rule of the first president of Tunisia, Bourguiba, and then later the second president of Tunisia, Ben Ali, who was ousted in 2011. And just anecdote, in that 24 hours, we changed 4 presidents, because you know, like you wait on it for 50 years, then whoever comes, you say like, go away. And so in 24 hours, we changed like 4 presidents. That's just for your trivia, in case anybody is interested in trivia nights. And the juxtaposition involves struggles that other characters in the book go through. For example, in terms of colonialism being over, but systems of education being established, forced secularism being established, and how that has affected recruitment in the very like political sense toward the one-party system. Because for the longest time, for that 50 plus years, we've only had the one party, one TV channel, one whatever, and like when you do not belong, it creates a friction. And as he writes these letters, we go through this different periodization, and I hope that one could witness as the characters grow, the growth of their worldview that is also reflected in the nuances of the language. For example, and perhaps Safa could speak to this, yesterday we had a rehearsal, and then she told me, oh, now I understand, no wonder like that you're using this Abbasi type of language in some parts, but also like dialect in other parts, and that it is a conflict in terms of the material realities of the book. I do not know if that answers it fully.
Well, I mean, I think you already gave us the bridge to Safa in thinking about some of the challenges and choices that you made in rendering these nuances into English. So if there's anything in particular that kind of stood out for you in that process.
Yeah, I think again, like I said before, I think what interested me in the main character is that he contains so many contradictions. He seems to be himself a kind of layers and layers of contradiction. He doesn't seem to have a clear stance on anything. In fact, he's not even convinced at some point that he's a human being. He constantly refers to himself at various points in the novel as a dog, later in the part we didn't read from, he talks about himself as a plant, in the third person, that he's a sort of a plant kind of soaking into the ground. So I was immediately interested in, on one hand, this intensely historical situation of Tunisia from the 1930s to the 1990s, and on the other hand, this character who almost refuses to locate himself anywhere. And that, I think, that tension that's built into the text comes across in the way that Roula is using register, in the register of the language. And sometimes the language shifts very quickly from one could read as colloquial speech to very high register of Arabic, even Quranic Arabic in certain points, and I think we can talk about that. But just as an example, we were going over a verb yesterday, and I was saying, well, I haven't seen this verb since I was reading like 10th century poetry, and she's like, yeah, I know. Anyway, I had to, as a reader, before even translating, I had to sort of track how the language was working, because there was often these kinds of subtle shifts. And I'm sure I've made, there's different ways I could have done it, but that's what I was paying attention to.
Can I say? Okay, dork moment, or geek moment, or like there are certain, I'm biased, but I believe that the language, like Arabic, is superior. Anywho, so there are some words that have multiple meanings, like in any other language. So, for example, we have had numerous conversations with Safa when we were reading side by side yesterday about how to translate this word. For instance, you have a word that means end, other, and afterlife. And all of the three meanings were intentional within the choice of that word, but it is very subtle. Like, how do we do about that? Like, do we work with a sentence? Do we look for a mythological reference or folkloric reference that exists within the English language or vernacular that would give the same meaning, or is that juxtaposed in a different culture that is not contextual to the history or country or city where this is happening? And
What word is that?
آخرة. And another piece of info for like your trivia night. There is this word, al-haq. It simultaneously means the epistemological truth and the moral right. It's just the one word. And I've seen it often translated as justice, for example. But I think it leaves a space to play in, for example, as the characters grow up, for the word to take different meaning each time it is used, from empirical or epistemological truth to becoming the moral virtues.
So we have another excerpt, but before we move to that, we do want to collect any voices or questions that are immediately coming to mind in the audience. We'll let it simmer. After the next excerpt, there will be a moment to kind of start to bring in questions, and we can hear from you all then. And I'm just checking my time because someone gave me a very disciplined timestamps for our event. So now we'll read the second excerpt.
ذات مرة خرجت ليلا من المنزل. كنت قد سمعت أصواتاً صورتها مخيلتي جميلة. أصوات ضحك كانت، وكنت أبحث عن القليل من السعادة التي غابت عن بيتنا. على مقربة من المنزل جلس ثلاثة رجال يتسامرون ويأكلون. اقتطعوا حطباً من أشجار الزيتون القريبة وأشعلوا ناراً تجمعوا حولها يشوون لحماً. لم يشعروني بالخوف، فقط ببساطة اقتربت يقودني خيط رائحة الشواء ورائحة الذكورة وتوق إلى صحبة الرجال، توق إلى الابتعاد عن النساء ومشاغلهن الغبية ودموعهن اللامتناهية. النساء لا شغل لهن غير الغسيل، أرى أمي تغسل طوال الوقت ولا حديث لها غير أسعار الطماطم والخبز. احتجت إلى رائحة الرجال الخشنة المفعمة كبريتا وسجائر كريستال، عرقا وغبارا. كان عبقا مختلفا تماما عن رائحة الذر، رائحة البصل ومسحوق الغسيل، تلك الرائحة التي تتعطر بها أمي.
Once I left the house at night. I had heard voices that sounded beautiful to my ear. There were voices of laughter, and I was in search of some of the happiness that was nowhere to be found at home. At a short distance from the house, there were three men, sitting, chatting, and eating. They broke off a branch from the olive trees nearby and started a fire, gathering around it to roast meat. They didn't scare me. I simply approached them, led by the scent of roasting meat and masculinity, a longing for the company of men, a longing for distance from women and their ridiculous tasks and their endless tears. The woman had no work besides cleaning. I saw my mother cleaning all the time, and she didn't talk about anything except the prices of tomatoes and bread. I craved the harsh scent of the men who reeked of matches and crystal cigarettes, sweat and dust. It was an aroma altogether different from the scent of humiliation, of onions and laundry powder, which was the way my mother smelled.
ذات مرة وجدت شفرة حلاقة في الزبالة. فرحت كثيرا كأن الله أسر لي بأنني كبرت. أخذتها، ذهبت إلى الحمام، مرغت وجهي بالصابون كما رأيت والد صديقي يفعل. للأسف لم تكن هناك مرآة. خدشت ذقني عدة مرات ولم أتنازل عن حلاقتها. لا بأس أن يأتي الرشد مع قليل من الألم. رأتني أمي وزجرتني. بكت كثيرا. ربما أخفتها. ظننت أنها علمت لحظتها أنني لم أعد طفلا يحتال عليه، لكنها أصرت. قالت أنني اغتصبت طفولتي، فقلت إنها تخاف علي من الكبر. لم أعد ولدا، ليس لي الحق في أن أكون والدا. إذ أنا رجل البيت وريث عرش تركه والدي إلى حين يعود.
Once, I found a razor blade in a pile of trash. I was overjoyed, as if God were confiding in me that I had grown up. I grabbed it, making my way to the bathroom. I lathered my face with soap, the way I'd seen my friend's father do it. Sadly, there was no mirror. I cut up my chin, but I didn't give up on shaving it. I didn't mind if maturity came with a little pain. My mother saw me and scolded me. She cried a lot. Maybe I frightened her. I thought she had learned the lesson that I wasn't a child she could trick anymore, but she insisted. She said I had spoiled my youth, to which I replied that she was afraid of me growing up. I wasn't a boy anymore. I had no right to be a boy, since I was the man of the house, heir to the throne my father had left behind until he returned.
كنت أنظر إلى أزواج جاراتنا دائما، ألثم وجوههم بعيني وجها، خدشا. انضممت إليهم. لم أكن لحما منذ مدة طويلة جعلتني لا أقدر على تمييز مصدره. قررت أنه غنم. الأجواء الاحتفالية أوشت بذلك. عادة لا يشوى اللحم إلا في العيد. لمحوني فنادوني. عرفت فيهم بعض الجيران. استقبلوني بفرحة عارمة ودعوني إلى الأكل، لكن لم يدعوني إلى الشرب. هم أحدهم بمناولتي كأسا، لكن الثاني زجره أني صغير. لم أستسغ التعليق، لكنني تناسيته. كانوا ودودين وفي وجوههم حبرة خفيفة محببة. شرعت آكل معهم بنهم، وهم يتحدثون عما لا يعنيني ويتهمسون ويتغمزون. كانت رائحة غريبة آتية من أفواههم تزداد حدة. رائحة أخرى تضاف إلى قائمة عبق الرجول.
I would always watch the husbands of the neighbor women, kissing their faces with my eyes, one by one, cut by cut. This time, I joined them. I hadn't eaten meat for so long that I'd become unable to determine which animal it came from. I decided that it must be lamb. The festive atmosphere suggested as much. Usually, roasting meat was reserved for Eid. They noticed me and called me over. I recognized some of the neighbors among them. They invited me over enthusiastically and let me eat, but they didn't let me drink. One of them thought to hand me a glass, but the one next to him said no, saying I was young. I didn't like his remark, but I didn't make a fuss. They were friendly, and in their cheeks there was a slight redness I found endearing. I began to eat with them, ravenously, while they talked about things that meant nothing to me, gesturing and whispering among themselves. There was a strange scent coming from their mouths, growing stronger, a different kind of scent that added to the aroma of manhood already in the air.
أطل الليلة، قال أحدهم وقد بان عليه الانزعاج. كان مرتبكا يلتفت يمنة ويسرة بحثا في شيء غير موجود. لا يزال الوقت باكرا، وأنا أقسمت ألا أعود إلى زوجتي حتى تتربى. فلتحمد ربها أنها وجدت رجلا يهتم بها، غيرها لا يزال في انتظار. نظر إلي وابتسم، فزجره صاحبه المرتبك. محسوب، لم تنتهي الدنيا عندها، ولا أحتاج إليها وهي كالأكل البارد، كل شيء فيها قديم وبلا طعم. لكأنني كنت سأسكر إن لم أكن حرا من بلواها. غيرها من دون رجل يتعذب ليلا نهارا. تحمد ربي. لماذا لم يطردها صاحب الدار بعد؟ قال وهو ينظر إلي بطرف عينه، بدا كما لو أن في الأمر مؤامرة ما. كلمتها مرة قصد أن أعينها كأخ، طردتني وأسمعتني قبيح الكلام. لعلها لم تفهم قصدك. ولعلي ولدت البارحة، كم ستبقى بلا رجل؟ ما زالت على عتبة 30 تلك العاهرة. هي عاهرة لأنها زجرتك؟ ماذا كانت لتكون إن لم تزجر؟ العاهرات نوعان، نوع يرفض ونوع آخر لا يمتنع، وهو المفضل لديه. وانطلق الجميع في الضحك، وضحكت معهم لا أدري لماذا.
We've been up all night, one of them said, beginning to seem distressed. He was confused, looking to his right and left, searching for something he couldn't find. It's still early, and I swore not to return to my wife until she shapes up. She should be thankful that she found a man interested in her. Others like her are still waiting. He looked at me and smiled, before his confused friend scolded him. Whatever, let it go. There's more to the world, and I don't need her. She's like stale food. Everything about her is old and bland. I wouldn't be getting trashed tonight if I didn't have to deal with her. That other woman without a man, she's struggling day and night. She should thank the Lord. Why hasn't the landlord kicked her out yet? He said, as he looked at me out of the corner of his eye. It began to seem as if there was some kind of scheme at play. I spoke to her once, hoping to help her out, like a brother. She rejected me and cussed me out. Maybe she didn't understand your intention. And maybe she was born yesterday. How long will she remain without a man? She's coming up on 30, that whore. She's a whore because she criticized you? What would she be if she hadn't then? There are two kinds of whores, the type that refuses and the other type that doesn't resist, and that's my favorite type. Then the group began to laugh, and I laughed with them, not knowing why.
صباح اليوم التالي سمعت جارتنا تشكو لأمي زوجها السكير. قالت أنه أتاها ليلا وهو مخمور فزجرته وطردته، فخرج معانقا الزجاج مع كلبه وحلف ألا يعود لامرأة فاجرة تهجر زوجها. ذبح الكلب وأكله وعاد إلي في الصباح باكرا. أحيانا يا أسي أحس كذلك أنني كلب شريد في قصر ذاكرتي. الكلب إن زجر وضرب يهرب ثم يعود إلى صاحبه فرحا ما إن يناديه. كنت أعود إلى الشارع، أسبح في الليل في حينا الشعبي العتيق، أضاحك الغرباء وآكل لحمي معهم عند سهر نميمة. بكل حماسة الكلاب وصدقها كنت وافيا بغرباء أطعموني دون أن أدري أنني كنت وجبتهم.
The next morning, I heard the woman next door complaining to my mother about her drunken husband. She said he came to her drunk at night, so she scolded him and threw him out, and he left clutching his bottle with his dog, and swore not to return to any bitch who abandons her husband, who rejects her husband. He slaughtered the dog and ate it, returning the next morning in tears. Sometimes, Asil, I too feel like a stray dog in the palace of my memory. Even if scolded and beaten, dogs run away only to return happily whenever their owners call them. I used to go back to the street, immersing myself in the nights of our rundown neighborhood, joking with the strangers, then eating my flesh, staying up late, spewing venom. With all the enthusiasm and sincerity of a dog, I was faithful to strangers that fed me, not knowing that I was their meal.
Well, that was a incredible passage, and very subtle, but dramatic all the same, with the kind of disguised reveal, right? Something I think is remarkable about that passage, that it functions very well as a kind of self-contained story within a story. As a short story, but it is, we don't quite know, what's happening with the narrator himself until the end. But even then, it's not a full reveal, right? We have to kind of take this, just kind of sit with actually this really big revelation, but it's done very subtly, right? All right, I've been thinking about, I've read the passage last night. I've just been in my head since, so not necessarily a coherent thought, but it's been sitting with me. So what we're going to do now, should we do the Q&A of this, or should we break to come back for the close reading?
Give some context.
Yeah.
Maybe either question or break, then conversation.
Yeah, okay, great. So, what's happening in this passage exactly for you?
I know that Safa had a lot to say about this, so this is why I've requested the mic. What I have to say is an anecdote that there was one of the reviews that were written about this guy. The reviewer said that as you read the novel, you forget that it was written by a woman. So, and he meant it as a compliment. And I think that was pretty much like picking up on the misogyny, right? But when I was reading his review, I obviously am not the man he thought I was going to be reading this novel. But me reading his review, I was thinking, are you serious? Do men really think like that? I thought that was an imaginative exercise, but turns out, so in this chapter, we are reading part of the letters that he's writing. So he's growing up like the man of the house. He's obviously younger, and he's trying to find his tribe, only finding wrong tribes, and the rest of the novel alternates between a chapter by the narrator and a chapter that is a letter. So I don't know where I was going with that. So Safa, here we go.
Yeah, I mean, just to give the passage some context as well, this is sort of some way through the second chapter, and the chapter opens with Muhammad, the main character, sort of writing to Asil, his sort of lost beloved, saying, I'm going to tell you now. I'm going to sort of write down what I couldn't sort of contain within me, and I'm hoping that my writing is going to be able to give you the whole story. But even by the time we get to the end of the chapter, he even says, I failed. I couldn't even give you everything. Like, I couldn't actually articulate myself fully. And so when I got to this piece, at the level of reading, at just an experiential level, I was in a sort of suspense. I was like, what is going on? Why are we getting this kind of, he's sort of clearly interested in something. He's desiring gender in a certain way. He's desiring a certain form of masculinity that he feels will allow him to be responsible, to occupy his role. But at the same time, I became interested in the detail of laughter, and the fact that the thing that really draws him is the laughter of these men, and then at the end, he laughs without knowing why he's laughing. So that was the kind of detail that kind of pulled me into the passage, and it made me think about what is the relationship between Muhammad's desire for masculinity, for manhood to grow up, and his desire for this laughter, which seems sort of excessive, which seems strange to him, which he can't quite grasp. And, so that tension was sort of with me the whole time.
Yeah, and Safa was telling me yesterday that because of the context, the historical context, it got her to thinking about the coloniality of gender, that men and women can only be equal.
Do we have any questions immediately for this passage specifically before we take our intermission? Okay. So we're going to take a break of about 7.5 minutes, according to please enjoy some of the treats that we have here, and then we'll come back and we're going to do some close reading because we could not have an event without close reading. That one's for Amir specifically. But please help yourself, and then we'll come back in a few minutes for the rest of the discussion. Okay, in the second half, we hope that this will be very interactive. We have a passage that Safa has selected, and the idea is to kind of practically read this text and to kind of think about translation and close reading, or rather to think of translation as a practice of close reading. So Safa is going to kind of start us off by kind of framing this part of the discussion. And at any point, if the spirit moves you, you want to kind of ask a question or engage or raise a point, feel free. This is really, the idea here is to kind of engage in a collective practice of close reading. So it's not just the speakers, but we're really trying to build something together in conversation. So without further ado, we'll hear back from Safa.
I guess I'll wait for Roula.
Oh, that might be useful.
Well, just at a level of like why I chose this passage, I think this was the moment, this sentence, الذكريات تذهبه ولا يريد أن يأتك نفسه من أغلالها, like he doesn't want to get rid of memory. He's at once sort of trapped in memory, and at the same time he doesn't want to get free of it. So I was curious immediately. I was like, okay, so memory here is not what I would have expected. And so I sort of began trying to figure out what is Muhammad, the main character's relationship to memory? What does it mean for him? And how is it related to Asil, this sort of heartache in the north of Tunisia? So it seemed that where we start the novel, which is in the sort of space of history, now in this passage we're in memory, and that somehow this passage is speaking back to this contradiction or this situation at the beginning of the novel where we're in so-called sort of post-colonial Tunisia, but clearly we're still in a period of sort of economic hardship, extreme precarity. And so those are the things that brought me to the passage. So I can stop there and maybe ask Roula if you want to share some of your thoughts on this passage.
So this is the chapter right after the introduction, and here it was becoming a slow reveal. I hope that this will simply set the scene to what is he doing outside of his hometown, or why did he end up there. So this chapter was supposed to introduce the idea of running away, and running away not from something but towards something, and also the purpose of what his life revolves around right now is sort of a merciful revenge. Safa and I spoke about this word quite a bit yesterday, because in Arabic, the combination of these two words is not the correct one. Like, what comes first to mind is euthanasia. You would say the merciful murder, I suppose, is the word for euthanasia in Arabic. And good dad.
Good dad.
That's what I didn't know that, but like in Arabic, it's even translated to merciful. Murder. So it was giving us a snippet into the character, like to unfold the rest of the story, and it is the first letter. Maybe I will like reveal a little bit of what happens between the intro to this bit. In the introduction, towards the end, we learn that this homeless man has learned to recognize people through their footsteps, through their shoes. There is a passage about him discussing all of that. And so one day he's just laying on the ground, and a person is about to pass by, and he understands that like that's the person that they loved and lost. So like they grab her foot, everybody panics, she runs away. Everybody reacts to a homeless man touching this woman, and then her character is also revealed through this chapter. But throughout the rest of the novel, their meeting is brief, and they sort of intersect with a number of memories, like whether they've had them or not. Let me know what you'd like me to comment on.
So I'm thinking, since we're a smaller group now, maybe it would make sense, and there'll be more of a conversation. We'll take the mic off.
Oh yeah, I can yell.
But before we do, I do just want to hear from Safa some of your thoughts around close reading and translation specifically. I know we were talking before about philology and just how you view close reading to kind of frame how we think about that, and then maybe it would be worth kind of just reading this out loud, and then we can dive in as a group. So we'll hear from you on mic to frame it, and then we'll go off mic for the reading and the discussion.
Yeah, so I'm thinking of close reading glossed really in the way that Edward Said glosses it, which is as ijtihad, or as like a kind of interpretive struggle. That is also a process of coming back again and again, so it's also rereading. And it's the purpose of close reading, as Said frames it, is not necessarily to get the secret or sort of get what is immediately sort of beneath the surface, but to get inside the process of language and to sort of try to figure out how the language is working. And at the same time, he frames the close reading involves kind of two aspects or two stages, two activities activities, one being reception or surrendering to the text and its own logic and itself as a self-contained kind of aesthetic object that doesn't just neatly reveal anything, that's almost resists interpretation. And then on the other hand, a kind of resistance, and that resistance is both the resistance of the text to interpretation, but then also in reading the text to resist certain kind of flattening ideologies, flattening kind of cultural narratives in the world, or in the sort of historical situation in which the work is being encountered or being read. So I think for me, like I'm thinking of this novel, like I was just on the subway, like writing here, and there was a woman next to me speaking on the phone and telling someone on the phone, like, no hay señal, there's no signal, like I'm gonna get cut off, right? So that immediately began connecting for me also with the question of translation. Like I'm thinking very associatively, I guess, is the way I think about close reading. So I think, yeah, reception and resistance are two framing kind of concepts that I think might be useful.
So, do you want to read the passage, or do we want to invite others to read the passage, maybe?
I mean, does anybody want to read?
Yeah. Sure, okay. Memories haunted him, and he had no desire to free himself from their shackles. His hometown was filled with heartache, but his living heartache resided in the north, in the capital. And so it was in the capital, then, that he chose to live in voluntary exile. He wanted to spend the rest of his days as a pin in the eyes of the one who resided as a dagger in his heart, a shard in his memory. As far as he could tell, time takes on a different meaning when one has no appointments or duties to hurry to, nobody to meet, no work to take care of. He felt like his life dragged on, that his time resembled that of a butterfly going through its life cycle, from birth through childhood, adulthood, and old age, in a single day, short in duration but lengthy in experience. A day was as long as a lifetime, and his days spent in homelessness were so many that he didn't know if he would have a life after them, and he didn't want one either. As for this life, he wasn't sure if it was indeed up to him, or if it was the path he simply had to take. He wanted neither safety nor well-being. He only wanted to collapse, since only collapsing put him in touch with his reality. He had locked the doors of return to safety and comfort, leaving their keys inside for good. The homeless man thought he was the first one not to run away from his torturer, but toward him. He couldn't bear being away from him. He would walk for miles and miles, hoping to stir up what was latent within him, hoping he might see panic in his eyes, then feel the release of merciful revenge.
So I guess I'm curious, like, what stands out to me here again? Like,
I have like a lot of questions about like some of the like translation choices, because obviously I don't know Arabic, so I'm kind of like, oh, what are these words and how did they get to be the kind of equivalents? Like in the first line, like what is the word that translates as haunted and what is the word that translates as shackles?
Yeah. So the haka is what's being translated as haunted.
Uh-huh.
It could be translated more, I guess, flatly or literally as pursued.
It's pursuit or stalking or haunting.
Yeah, okay.
And then shackles.
I can go farther with lahaqa lahiq means like the after or like the one coming later.
It follows.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's a literal translation, like word for word in this first line, I think.
So what are the shackles?
The shackles are also correct, like in the sense of it being a literal translation.
Okay.
But there are other formulations that we have thought about for a minute. For example, the word akhira appears here, that word that means the other, the end, and the afterlife.
Okay.
So the first formulation of the sentence in English about whether or not, like, the length of the life was unclear and whether or not he wanted a life after, we had a conversation about, do we allude to the afterlife, do we not allude to the afterlife, do we say we didn't want it to end? So how do we play around that word? And are there other like instances here that jump up to you? Because I think that you wanted to discuss memory specifically.
Or even, I mean, let's just stay with what you just pointed out, because I think there is a lot there.
You wanted to talk about falling.
Yeah, or just staying with even
Yeah.
this question of the afterlife, and I think that's related to the shackles that you mentioned. Like, so I mean, a love would be like restraints or fetter. Like it doesn't have shackles is a bit strong.
Like chains.
Chains. Like
Yeah.
it's just like a restraint. And so then the sentence that comes later, the way the paragraph develops, like you didn't know if you would have a life after. Like you didn't know that after you sort of inevitably kind of die, this kind of misery, whether something would come after that.
I think the other thing with aghlal, because I'm thinking in reverse in Arabic, could have been quyud, but quyud would be less heavy than aghlal are. So I suppose in English also shackles are heavier than restraints. The other thing is that the second meaning of quyud would be boundaries, and I felt that there's like a little bit more agency to that. So like the contradiction was unnecessary here.
So are you saying that the translation is making you rethink the original language?
I'm saying that since we're talking about the word choice and how the original text was translated into English, I'm starting to think about exactly that, like how are these words different from the synonymous in Arabic? And
Yeah, right. Like if you're choosing between
If I
shackles,
had-
chains, restraint,
Right.
one thing you can think about is like, what are the distinctions that I chose between in Arabic, and how do those distinctions map?
yeah,
Like instead of just mapping the word, you map the kind of complex. Yeah, makes sense.
That's very interesting because I was also thinking about like memory in the sense of like you remember in Arabic and then like coming back. It's so interesting to come back to this and then what happens to the whole concept of memory. Like when I'm basically remembering something writing in English, I find that it's very different than when I'm like remembering writing in Arabic. So like when we're coming back to this like cycle of translation here, I find it very interesting in terms of reconfiguration of what these memories are.
Another word, just to continue speaking to what Kat has asked, we had a conversation about falling, what word would be more appropriate.
Oh, for on the collapse.
Collapse,
Yeah, okay,
yeah.
collapse. Yeah, right, full collapse.
So the Arabic word, it is falling, it is also collapsing, and it is also analogous to the way that in English we would use like a fallen angel or like a fallen, I suppose, woman, or I don't know if that's only Russian, I'm not sure, but it is said, right? It is something that is said in English. So that was inferred, and so we were thinking about the level of intensity of the word that we wanted to use. And in some words, Safa mentioned earlier that there were Quranic references, and where we thought we had to do an exercise. There is the part that we read about the dog, which this small passage is from the larger second reading that we have had. Which word we were contemplating? I'm losing myself in my train of thought.
No, you're talking about he wasn't sure if it was his choice,
Right.
or if he was sort of put on this path.
That and gossip. Thank you. So, for example, the passage, so the main character is having a little bit of a spiritual conflict during the period that unfolds. We have the post-colonial state, and the first president of Tunisia, who is applying the French model of laïcité onto all institutions, women were haunted if they were like wearing the veil or the hijab to public institutions. Like you could go wear it like if you're going to buy some groceries from like the market, but not if you want to work or if you want to go to school, etc. And at the same time, there was recruitment happening within orphanages from like I'd say the Islamic opposition. Most of the people were either in exile, and the people that have remained, there was a strong surveillance state back under Bourguiba. He was a dictator. He claimed himself to be an enlightened dictator because he made education free. He banned polygamy. Divorce is legal. Abortion is legal. You name it. Abortion is legal whether you're married, unmarried, young, old, whatever. Like it doesn't matter. So the main character has had a close relationship with the recruitment processes, but also like where he would fall within the political spectrum. And so some of the references as he tells his memory, I wanted to allude to a religious like conflict of sorts or spiritual conflict by using some terminology from like jurisprudence. So there is this dilemma that exists in the jurisprudence about whether man, and I suppose in all Abrahamic religions at least, whether we have agency and choice or whether we are predestined certain destinies. So prior to this paragraph, we were discussing that he has moved from the south to the north. There is an economic connotation with that, and he's ended up in this location, and he is choosing to not run away from his torture by the running, but is he choosing really? So we wanted to see whether that could be implied in the language in any shape or form. We also talked about, in the dog passage, Safa named it a dog in the palace of memory, right? So in the passage where like he joins this barbecue and he's so happy, and then like he hears the neighbor saying like, oh my God, like my husband left drunk, came back next morning without the dog crying, and like he has this moment of realization that he was eating that, and that he was laughing about his mother being like single and how long would she wait and now or whatever, like so he was eating his own flesh and so on. We were also discussing a moment about the word that would be most suitable for Namima, which is how he describes in the last sentence the moment of realization that he's eaten his own flesh, him being the dog, and also he has laughed at his own mother or like mocked her or engaged in gossip about her. So Safa and I spent last night, I'm like, maybe there are references, because they need to be commonly known. Like this is not an exercise that is intellectual for somebody to read and try to read through the words. Like ideally I wanted it to come across rather directly but subtly. I don't know if that's an oxymoron or not. And so we were thinking, is there something in English that's a phrase and that designates something else? For example, in English when you say, you know someone, that might mean that you had intercourse with someone, because like that's the biblical sense of knowing someone.
That's archaic, but it is a
right, it's okay. Yeah. Well, Safa said like 10th century stuff are in there. So there is a little bit of an interplay on the dialect and like the modernity or like post-colonialism, but also a language that is either from jurisprudence, either Quranic, or language that is archaic, such as like knowing someone.
Intercourse is that as well, because intercourse can mean talking to someone, or it can mean, in that case, the non-sex meaning is the archaic one, right?
Oh.
Having intercourse means to talk, and then it comes to mean to have sex.
I had no idea. Okay. So yeah, and we were thinking. So I was googling passages, like thinking, like where did God say it's like a sin to gossip, and whether there was a particular reference that's a little bit metaphorical and not very clear. There was something about toxic tongues. We experimented with that. There was something else. We didn't want to use gossip because that's very gossip girl, and that's not really a match. So we had some conversation about that, and also the part where like the man leaves his wife and like she needs to be disciplined and he won't return and he's getting drunk. In Arabic, when he says abandon, this is another word that is inferred. That means that she didn't put out Like that's why like, they had to fight. It doesn't feel like that she like grabbed her bags and left, but the way that you would have a conversation in front of a child to refer to like the sinful act of your wife, you would say like that's the larger passage. Hajri. Yeah.
Gossip is a good word because originally it means relative by marriage, like gossiping. And then you refer to your neighbours as your gossips. And then it came to mean the kind of talking you did with your neighbours. So it's a good word.
And that would have been a great one. How do we know?
But yeah,
I don't know how much it resonates like that. For
yeah, like I know that because I'm weird like that.
Because like for me, the English reference, like it strikes me as quite like modern and popular.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't think of it as something that is archaic or metaphorical or
Even
subtle
juvenile.
or.
Even gossip is sort of juvenile.
So we
It has
struggle
all
with
the
it, but
business
actually
stuff,
like
yeah.
that would have been very, very appropriate because the Arabic word is that.
Yeah. I have actually another question, which is about like colloquiality. I need to do it really soon. I'm going to ask this and then I'm going to run. But I was looking in this passage. You've got doors of return, which is like very much like, not a colloquial translation. Right? To be colloquial, we would say like the doors back to or something. Right? They're like much more like kind of everyday ways of saying that. What is the Arabic there, and what's behind your thinking the choice of kind of picking a more unidiomatic rather than an idiomatic English version?
I must confess, I don't know idiomatic what that means.
Oh, sorry, idiomatic is like the way that you use language normally, whereas unidiomatic would be if you use language in a slightly, like not talking, the way, something you wouldn't say in conversation. Like you wouldn't say in conversation, oh, the doors of return,
Yeah.
you would say the door back.
Right. Yeah, so it is the door of return, like whether that choice was intentional or not.
I mean, the whole passage is quite like non-colloquial. The passage is quite kind of poetic. It's quite kind of,
Yeah, I think I've reserved the colloquial usually language. So in Arabic, you have the archaic but formal but classical language that is shared amongst everybody, and that you would read the news in it, or the anchor will speak in it, the books are written in it. Everything else that is more local is downgraded as dialect. However, these are entire languages and they're affected by the native tongue, meaning the indigenous population, for example in North Africa, who are the Amazigh, and the histories of colonialisms. For example, in Morocco there were the Spanish, in Tunisia there were no Spanish, but there were the French. So like the Arabic is a mixture of different vernacular, and I have chosen one of the idiomatic or not idiomatic, I'll write it down later so I remember. So I have chosen to speak colloquially for the passages that either needed to give a lived voice, so during conversations or like at some points particular expressions, or even within the body of the text, which is considered like a great heresy because like you don't tamper with the Latin by just like inserting a random modern urban kind of word, where I felt that the word itself was distinct to something that was born out of the context of Tunisia. I can bring an example that wasn't in the readings, but for example, during the French colonial period, the French used to employ Tunisian menial workers. So menial workers or factory workers in French, that's called les ouvriers. So les as the baker. And ouvrier, as the article, so the workers, les ouvriers, and people who were not working for the French, therefore did not learn French, did not become the court enslaved person or like the enslaved person within the house, to make an analogy that's like impossible and incorrect. They did not have that access to French, but they would refer to the trader workers that are working there. And the way that they would hear who they are or their identity, they would hear the French calling them les ouvriers, les ouvriers, les ouvriers. So in Tunisia we have a word called zoufri. Because we don't have the V sound, but there is the F sound, and the article gets dropped, so it's just the zoufri. So like, who's that person you want to say that's a traitor, like dirty, despicable? You say, zoufri. And it's a Tunisian word that like is emanating from French, and like certain products are the same, but mostly Another curse word I can mention in Tunisian, so I can teach you the curse word. So, but I'll only say it in English, so it's not vulgar or anything. But it's also not vulgar at all, like outside of Tunisia. This is something that you would only get there. Again, during the French colonial period, like you had the traders that had to come and like spy on what you're doing and sort of tell the French that you're planning this uprising. But they would be worried that somebody would recognize them. So when you have the line of the number of suspects and you have to point at like who's your suspect, at the time I think we weren't like as advanced to have like the glass where you can see through but you can't be seen or stuff like that. So you had to pretty much show up, look at the people and say like, that guy, Hanan, take Hanan away. So the traders or spies for the French used to put on their heads the flour bag, like the paper bag from flour bags. So like you would wear it, like you would put holes for eyes.
So they couldn't see you,
And so you can't be, so that's the mask. That's like the DIY mask that you can like bring into the police station. And so there is a distinct curse word in Tunisia as well to say a traitor. That is, well, you're Lebanese, so that's not particularly offensive. Tahan, which comes from flour. So like the flour man. And so, funny, but like if these two dialects intermix, if somebody incorrectly refers to a baker that's working with flour as such, they might be offended in Tunisia, but that might be the appropriate word to use in the Levant.
Yeah.
And so I've left the colloquial for such instances that I thought might enable further access to the context, the history and the culture that was happening. Otherwise, it was more.
So your question, though, in this particular instance, I think is actually one about syntax.
Ooh.
And a certain problem that arises. I mean, I face this problem a lot when I try to translate some text that I work on. Which, so in Arabic, we have something known as the idafa, right? Which is here, the door of return, right? Here is the abawab of the rule, right? And like there are different conventional ways you can translate that in English, right? Simple possessive sometimes, or for, or in any number of ways. But it always stumps me as someone who hasn't quite mastered this, how to render this unique grammatical structure in Arabic. And I think what often ends up happening when you look at English translations of Arabic, there are all these noun structures because the idafa is there, but it's often not necessarily, it doesn't get you to the idiomatic expression, right? It doesn't get you to the conversational expression, right? And so I'm curious, as a follow-up, so when you write laqad awsat, like, is that phrase, like, is this, I mean, this might be like an everyday speech.
No.
No, right. So in that case, like, what would be an example of a phrase like that in everyday speech? So closed into the door.
Yeah, I think Abwab also is particularly elevated to me when I was reading. And also, just as a kind of maybe funny, I also want to say that I've been told before when doing translation that I tend to elevate, right? Like this is a tendency I have. And so there's a way, like you were just talking about the kind of battle of dialects. I think there's a way that translating, especially like a kind of passage that has a lot of pathos, can force a kind of elevation that might not even be necessary. But it's a result of this almost battle, or this kind of struggle between English and Arabic that's like happening through my attempt to translate. But I was thinking of like Abwab.
So but doors of return, because it is elevated in Arabic, is appropriate here.
Yeah.
Because it's reaching for that poetic register.
The other thing I was thinking about, we were talking about historical conditions, and I think this passage is set in 1990, so this is a chapter that he's writing in 1990, and that would have been shortly. I mean, yes, it's sort of the transition from Bourguiba to Ben Ali, and then it's also a little bit after the IMF restructuring programs that came in the mid-'80s, and those were specifically harmful to rural communities, right? So like with the removal of subsidies of like wheat and semolina, like there was this kind of migrations to capitals in search of kind of sustenance became kind of common. And so it's interesting to me when I was translating that his memory is not just reminiscence. Like it's not like he's just looking back and saying, oh, you know, my good old days in the village, or the good old days in, you know, my previous home, now I'm away. It's not that kind of memory. So that immediately interested me. It's rather this kind of paradoxical memory where he is reminiscing, but often his reminiscence terrify him. They fill him with fear because he's reading in his memories signs of things that he didn't understand then, but which he understands now to be kind of fulfilled historically in ways that are really troubling, right? So exactly that moment when he looks back and thinks about himself laughing with the men, that's not a pleasant memory. It's sort of a terrifying memory. Like, I didn't even know that I was actually being groomed and pursued and sort of taken advantage of. So he's almost reading himself as a figura in a way, you know, of, you know, this sort of historical condition that he's living in. And his memory holds all of that together in a way that he can't even make sense of. He's sort of trapped within it.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a relationship between just in response to what you said and this happens in the first few sentences with memories and his hometown that was filled with heartache, which is also, I guess, you know, it is a memory, and then there's his living heartache that's in the capital that he's currently residing. So I was just interested in like, maybe the Arabic words of how memories and heartache and living heartache, and then there's the dagger in his heart, sharpens memory, like what's the, just something that reading it in English that felt very, like these words were falling, like layering and, you know, presenting the texture of the memory and feeling, and I don't know, just like wondering with that, if there is any relation between the Arabic words.
And if I could piggyback on that question before we respond to it. So when I read that one, I was, I'm trying to understand the grammar here, because it's Koreatohu, then, well, Masqata.
مسقط رأسي.
Masqat Rasi. So that's what you translate as heartache.
That's just the hometown or something. Or home.
Yeah. So, I mean, Korea was like village, right?
Yes.
And
So the heartache is waja, was translated as waja.
right.
Yeah, like so Safa said hometown for both Qaria wa Masqat Rais.
Okay.
Qaria is a village and Masqat Rais literally means the space where the head falls, which is a connotation. Oh, actually fun story. Okay, if I may. So in ancient Arabic, there wasn't a word for state because things didn't function like that. I suppose in other languages too. So the way that people would refer to the place that they come from wasn't even a nation, because nation has more religious connotations rather than like connotations about the geography and territory. So the place where the head falls is like the place where you go to sleep, and like the place that you would go to war for. So like that is the place that you are from. And so village is for like the urban-rural divide, so to designate where in the south specifically he is in the context that Safa was sharing about the 80s and the structural adjustments and everything like that, to know sort of the class background, but also the ancient language of belonging that you would say now. If you refer to a place that you're from, you would be saying hometown. Fast forward, so this is the 1800s, Tahtawi goes to Paris, So that's an imam who travels from Egypt, writes a book called An Imam in Paris, and he's so flabbergasted and you remember having to read that off. Yeah, so he's so flabbergasted by this entire distinction between the nation and the state, and the nation state and the republic, etc. So he starts bringing in a new language to reflect the idea of a republic and of a public, and how the public exists within the republic, that it's for them, and so on and so forth. And then Arabic moves to the notions of building from the roots. So Arabic has like 3-letter roots to any word. So if you want to invent a new word for something that didn't exist before, like for example laptops or whatever, you look at the closest thing in terms of the root that can designate something you do with that instrument, and formulate it in a way that would designate this new invention. So you can constantly renew the language and bring it alive, unless you're like not into that and you're very orthodox and you're like, don't touch my language. But anyway, so as language evolved and the words state and nation were brought from like different roots, as in many other languages, I suppose most of them, state is very masculine and nation is the feminine. So like in Russian, Natsa, nation, in French, whatever. And Arabic is a gendered language. So actually you would say for a state, you would say he. For a nation, you would say she, which in English you would say it, right? So Arabic did not use nation-state together, because that's a transgender notion. It's incorrect grammatically, in terms of syntax, in terms of like that makes no sense. Is it a he or she or whatever? It wasn't used. It was like either a nation or a state. But then with the invasion of Palestine, we have the nation-state. And when you review like historical like literature that started emerging around that period, also with the drawings that started emerging around that period, it's quite upsetting, because like also in terms of like the machismo, like if Palestine is occupied, then she must be female. So it's not a state, it's a nation state, but it's also the mother nation. And so you get a linguistic configuration, because the language, because the nation is your mother, it's like what reproduces the future, and so on and so forth. And you get the only instance of the Arabic language when you have this alien configuration that is now grammatically correct and is a she, because it's occupied.
And in terms of the relationship between state and qaria, I think here it would have been important to say village, just because of the rural context.
So it is awesome.
Yeah, it's the village and the asima are two geographic designations.
But I suppose town also means that, because town is smaller than city, so we know that, right?
I have a totally random question. I was thinking about what you were discussing, I was thinking about this distinction between nation and state and gender. I was wondering if there's, I was thinking about the word in English of domestic, which has like a feminine designation and is both about the nation and the state in some ways. I don't know, I was thinking about that, and I was wondering if that's, if that enters the picture at all in Arabic.
How would you say domestic?
Well,
Which has also a household, the nation and the household or whatever, and the economy.
So the Arabic root, so like a house is manzil, and it comes from the 3-letter root that is the letter N, the letter Z, and the letter L, put together in this musicality. Like it's a scale, so you have a scale, and on top of the scale you can put 3 letters and add to them or subtract from them, like play with them, and it will give you, for example, an object or a noun or a person, or I don't know, like I'm clear about it, but this is unnecessary for your point. But manzil, so house, if we are like not thinking domestic specifically, but if it's a house, in the language it comes from the idea of coming down.
where you
coming down of your horse to go like rest, or of your camel, I suppose.
Yeah.
It's the place where you come back.
Yeah, home, hometown, homeland, all this stuff.
Yeah, and I think the interesting, apart from like the word, like he's always wanting to be outside. You know, like when he's always talking about, I wanted to be outside. Even as a child, when he was living in this house with his mother, he thought that he had to be outside, where he could be, as he says, you know, sort of only man outside. And so there's an interesting way that I think the novel plays with that, in the sense that if that's supposed to be, you know, that's his dream when he's young. He thinks that's going to bring him the company of these people, that he's going to be able to be responsible in all these ways. But he sees the kind of failure of that at a distance, like when he's writing to a seal. He sort of realizes that that wasn't what he thought it was at that time. So I think there is something here definitely about like space and the making of the nation, and the relationship between space and gender, and how the occupation of space sort of inflects gender in a context like post-colonial, where like there isn't the kind of strict domestic, non-domestic divide that is. Yeah, those things are not possible in the colonial context.
So we have just a few more minutes. Thank you all for indulging us in this close reading, trying to increase the amount of space we have for this kind of old school activity. I think it's just good practice to read things and to read different languages together. It gives a kind of different effect. But I do want to open it up to any questions or thoughts or reflections you have for Roula or Safa about the novel itself, or the kind of the practice of writing and translation, or conversation, anything.
So the second half of this first paragraph, I think, is really rich in terms of thinking about temporality, because there's this captivity attached to the temporality, but also the pacing here of the different sentences. I'm like using the M dash. I'm like, what are some of those? How did pacing translate? How did I'm interested in that mechanic, but also how this thinking about temporality and the captivity that's going through this passage.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the features of Arabic prose is that you can get away sometimes with very little punctuation, or even just the use of commas to sort of string together sentences. And the structure of the sentence will really guide the pace, because you have a flexible sentence structure. So you can have a jumla ismiya or jumla ta'liya, and that will sort of create a kind of rhythm. And so the alternating between those two are the ways that a paragraph in Arabic sort of builds its momentum. In English, pretty clear sort of unless you get really elevated in the language, it's hard to sort of play with sentence structure as much. And so the M dash was one solution to kind of set things off, kind of pause in the middle of a sentence, to sort of digress and come back. And also to try to use complex syntax whenever I could, while pulling the language down to the kind of colloquial, or the kind of everyday register, as much as I could, and sort of let the sentences flow, but not let them become sort of overwhelming. But it was really a challenge to have the paragraph build, because what's happening here is this sense of like his experience of time. The words themselves are almost mirrored.
I have something to say, but not about this. But before coming to the session, as I told you, I didn't practice or know the questions, and I was worried when they'll ask me something smart about translation, and I wouldn't know. So I was jotting some points, like reflecting on me translating the other way around, because I'm not comfortable translating to a language other than Arabic, because obviously I understand the context better, I can give the meaning better, but I have a mastery of English or French or other languages too, but I don't do what Safa does. I only translate back to Arabic. So one time, this is just about context and how it can transform a sentence. I made this note in my notebook just to keep it in my pocket in case you ask something. One time I was translating an article for the indie journal, and the title of the piece was "Rope Makes Me Feel Warm and Fuzzy Inside." And I was thinking that that's not something that you actually want to feel when you're in Arabia. Because you don't want to be feeling warm or fuzzy or, it's already hot outside, you don't want that. So how would you transmit that emotion? And it hit me that in Arabic literature, there is an expression that is iced my chest. So, because if you're hot, thirsty, etc., what is a feeling of relief and joy and bliss? And so iced my chest, it was the warm and fuzzy for me.
Nice. Cool. Well, I think we're probably at time. Join me in thanking their work individually, their work together. I think we're so lucky and to have benefited from your presence, and I'm really grateful that you showed up. Please continue to enjoy Eid and enjoy the fruits and the sweets. And also want to thank Lynn for the wonderful, wonderful performance that and if you're interested in close reading, in kind of the Arabic-related stuff at Rutgers, we have the Islam and the Humanities Working Group, where we try to kind of think art, culture, media, and other domains of kind of the Middle East and the Muslim world more generally. And we occasionally have events, but we're pretty bad at communication, so you just have to try to figure out, keep your eyes open on when things are happening.
And thank you, Corey.
And thank you,
Woohoo!
Corey.
The unsung hero of the American
Yes, thank you.
And also Corey brought boxes for people to take whatever they want to take. I guess.
Ziplocs, we're out of boxes.